online support for all of these patients, for all of these wonderful leaders. So going into the skills themselves, as I take you through these skills, I want you to, this is where I learned my practice. Family connections is where I learned my practice. There is practically not, I can't think of a single skill, this is the wrong slide, sorry. There is not a single skill in family connection that I haven't used in private practice with family members. All of those skills are completely applicable. But in family connections, we do them in a specific order because it's helpful that way. So the very first thing that we do in first meeting is people introduce themselves to one another. And it's close to a miracle, really, to see people walk in, stooped, their head down, bent in shame, because they sure have the child, the worst family situation in the entire world. And how can they even talk about it? And, as people start introducing themselves and their situation, they realize that they're absolutely not alone. In fact, oftentimes, as they hear other parents, they realize that in their mind, the other parents have it worse, right? If all the problems were put in the middle of the table, they take their own right back. And when they walk out, they are different people. You wouldn't recognize them. At the end of these 2 hours, the first meeting, 2 hours, they just walk lightly and they stay straight, and it's like a breath of fresh air. Right there, that first class is life-changing. But very quickly, we don't let them sit on just that. We introduce them to a first set of skills. And the first set of skills is that they have rights, and that they will learn these rights over time. One of these rights is healthy selfishness. The family has to continue functioning even though this illness is in the family. The family has to keep going. Another set of rights is learn how to say no. It's important for parents to know how to say no. There must be limits. Perry Hoffman has this line that I just love. Being a parent by nature is to be invalidating, right? We have to say no. We have to say no sometimes. And so how do you do that? How do you do that effectively? And not that the child who struggles is not going to be upset about it, but so it doesn't dissolve into a new war. And then we talk about the fact that we have to accept that even though we are problem-fixing beings, this is one problem we're not going to be able to fix. We can't fix our child's illness, and we have to accept also that at times we will lose our cool, and losing our cool is okay, because the expressed emotion study that Perry talked about shows that actually it's not about losing cool, it's about being in the picture and staying in the picture. And of course we're going to lose our cool. So giving parents permission, right? It's okay sometimes. It's better not to, but if you get angry sometimes, stay in the game, try again. The other sets of skills that we want to teach are basic assumptions to be effective. And this is how we introduce people to this idea of no blame. And no blame is going to be pervasive, of course, to the entire family connections. No blame, no judgment. Try to help parents shift their paradigm from seeing their kid as somebody with a problem to seeing their kid as somebody who has a bad character, like my child is a liar or my child manipulates, to seeing their child as somebody who's trying really hard and just doesn't know how to do any better. So that's the focus of this part. We develop interest and curiosity. We do a lot of psychoeducation. We talk about the sensitivity and the reactivity and the slow return to baseline. We also encourage people to remain very aware of their relatives' need for support and their own need for support as well. The next module focuses on relationship mindfulness. And again, this is something that we do a lot in individual family therapy as well. observing and describing one another, letting go of judgments, restating the judgments into facts, making benign interpretations. So something that I encourage parents to do is to sing in their head the little mantra, benign, benign, benign. And you know what? That sticks. Oftentimes parents will sort of come back and say, you know, she was just telling me all these tall tales, and I was thinking benign, benign, benign. And it sort of stopped me from thinking she's a liar, which is what I usually think, and it made things a little bit easier. By week 6 or 7, we get to this incredibly difficult concept called radical acceptance, where we introduce the 4 ways to deal with any problem, and where we introduce this really difficult concept for parents to accept, which is that change starts with them. That in the end, the relationship rests on both sides, and if they change, then there will be. So that's a really difficult step to get to, but we start small with radical acceptance, and of course our goal is to get them to radically accept that their child is no longer where their child was before, accept this concept of mental illness. Then we get to the place that everybody in Family Connections has been waiting for 7 or 8 weeks. How do you set limits? How do you enforce limits? So we teach parents to avoid this very loaded term of boundaries. You know, oh, she crossed my boundary. We don't do that. We just sort of go to what stops you from sleeping at night, and how can you change that? You know, if your child doesn't come home during the night, well, let's find some solutions and let's work on the solutions together. So it's determining that fine line between being supportive and being enabling, and helping parents to figure that out. And then we move to validation. We have one whole module devoted to validation. In fact, validation is so important for families that together they have put together a whole list of validating statements, which I'll be happy to send to anybody who wants it. And just email me, I'll send it to you. And just for the fun of it, we also put together a list of invalidating statements, which every parent in the world has said, every single one of them. But the list of validating statement gives ideas to parents about what they can do. So we talk about how to validate, when to validate, what validation is, how to validate a relationship, how to notice validation, invalidation, and then super important, self-validation and self-invalidation. And the last module is problem management. And in problem management, we look at ways to solve very specific problems, step by step. So when a parent has a goal in mind, and it's important to that parent, like, I want you to go to school, and school isn't happening. How can we solve that? How can we make a little step in that direction? So that's the last module. Those are final parent words, but I'll tell you, final parent words are actually, what am I going to do now that the class is over? You know, those are the final parent words. They really need to continue that connection. And so we try to offer classes or support. We encourage them to become leaders. That's what we try to. And if some of you are interested in creating after-class support groups, that can be super helpful. So that brings me to clinical interventions and some ideas, as I said, my clinical pearls, if you will, in clinical interventions. So I just want to remind you of this thing that we're talking about, the interconnectivity in families, that yes, by now I think we've made it very clear that they are second-hand victims of the disorder, but really in treatment, what interests me is that they are potential vectors for improved, more efficient treatment. So there are a couple of slides that So let me tell you, to engage families, actually, I always start in the same place. I start in that place where everybody in the patient and their family members shares some emotions that are worthy to be explored. Deep sadness at what is going on, some kind of weight or difficulties that have not been resolved, the difficulty of being misunderstood. That's true for everybody in the family. And the difficulty of being invalidated again and again, because everybody is getting invalidated, right? It's not just the patient, the family members are as well. And then the shame of not having this thing figured out. And in most all cases, we talk about the fact that everybody came by this in an honest way. You know, there is no malevolence there. There was never a parent waking up one day and saying, I'm going to make my kid's life as miserable as I possibly can, and vice versa. I had a patient one time, actually the son of a client, who said, oh, so this thing is a terrible case of massive misunderstanding with horrific consequences. And he's right. So my next two slides are two slides about what helps family and what gets them to participate in treatment and then to stay in treatment, even when we therapists say outrageous things like, let's let go of being right for a moment, let's try to be effective instead. You know, that gets a reaction. But some of these statements, if they are planted firmly in parents' minds, can help them stay the course. Pointing out that there is a lot of hope, that most patients get better with good treatment, and that having families in treatment is good, that impulsive symptoms are the first ones to decline. All of this is quite helpful to families. Conversations about medications are helpful as well. At all times, I keep in my mind that the client is not any one of the people in the room. The client is the relationship. The client is the transaction between people, the relationship. And we treat this client, the relationship, by educating both sides, by translating, and by clarifying the communication. So we're coaching for skills use, right? So when we educate, when we teach emotional literacy, you know, most parents have very little idea that emotions are happening all the time, that emotions lead to thoughts, that emotions and thoughts can provoke sensations, or that a sensation can cause an emotion. Most parents have very little understanding that fear and anxiety and dread are the same family of emotions, the same emotion, just a different level of it. Or same thing with frustration, anger, and rage. You know, so teaching family members this kind of information is going to be super helpful. And when I say at this point family members, I mean everybody, the client and the parents. We are translators. We want to help each side be heard. So we do a lot of, or I do a lot of, correct me if I'm wrong, don't let me put words in your mouth, but what I heard you say is this. Or when a parent says something that's a little invalidating, a little harsh, you know, reframing that, saying it a little more smoothly, it models it for the parent, it helps the child hear it in a little bit of a softer way. So not only do we prevent, as educators, we prevent misfirings in communication, but as translators, what we try to do is we try to fix the misfirings, we try to weed them out, if you will. And then we're coaches. You know, we just sort of model skills and keep pushing and look for the kernel of truth on both sides and encourage people to do this. We block, we redirect, we ask for validation. We're sort of coaching this thing along, which is sort of recreating a solid communication. I will go quickly over this one to this chart that you saw earlier that Perry showed. I don't show this chart to families, but I keep it in my mind at all times. I listen for polarities. The most frequent polarity that I see is this victim-villain polarity, and it happens in couples, parents, mom and dad, all the time. So dad will say, or mom, will say something like, she drives me crazy. She drives me crazy. We do nothing but pay attention to this kid. We've got to do something else. And then boom, mom will say, but poor kid. You know, come on, you're being harsh. And that just pulls the family apart, right? So for them to learn what looking for a synthesis, I call that with parents the zone of gray. Look for the zone of gray. Try to find areas of accord. This slide summarizes the obstacle that we tend to face in family work, and then the corresponding interventions. I told you it's superficial. I wish we could talk a whole lot more about this, but I'm mindful of time. So the obstacles that we see are first lack of skills. You know, there's a skills deficit with parents. They don't know about the illness, and they don't know what to do in the face of the illness. A key intervention there is psychoeducation, and a key intervention is safety interventions. You know, when we talk about kids who really struggle with suicide ideation, with self-injurious behaviors, well, that holds parents prisoners, and they need to know what to do in order to resolve that. The next set of obstacles is really strong emotions, and the key interventions are ongoing in individual family therapy. Parenting skills, so it's all the skills that we talked about in family connections and more. And then the third set of obstacles is when parents are rigidly attached. You know, they're having a really hard time letting go. Oftentimes, a lot of our patients had very promising futures. They were pretty extraordinary kids. And now they're struggling. And parents have such a hard time with that. So it's this idea of trying to let go the expectations, and then the key intervention is a lot of hard around radical acceptance. I am going to show you two documents that I give to parents. The first, they're both, well, actually three. All three of them are from Alan Pizzetti. The first one is this idea of reframing emotional dysregulation as either the cause or the consequence of all of those behaviors. And when you look at parents, and they look at this chart, they start nodding. But they may not nod too much at fears of abandonment until we explain it. But things like problems in relationships and low self-esteem, you sometimes have to clarify that attempts to avoid or numb is where substances come in. But that's when the nodding appears again, right? So this is really putting the illness in family-based language. So that's super important. The next chart, I am going to say 2 words about it. Be here this afternoon for Alan's presentation. He is going to talk about this. If I have 1 hour with a family, I will start with the biology of the illness, sensitivity, reactivity, and return to baseline, because that removes guilt. You know, so when you start with the biology of it, and then I move right into this. And in 1 hour, this unpacks so much and helps families so incredibly. So you will hear a whole lot more about this chart. And then the third chart that I use a lot is, I don't show it at first. It comes in super handy when a parent recounts a really egregious interaction with their child. Something that was really, that really didn't go well at all. And where everything escalated, you know, from blue skies to hurricane level 7 in about 2.5 seconds. And so it is still technically psychoeducation, but it really puts in context what families can do. What I say is that, yes, you know, a lot of people talk about relationships as being 50-50, but they're really not. Relationships are 100-100. You know, your child, the other person, did this incredibly egregious thing, and you are so upset. Still, you have 100% choice. We're going to do this. So let's use some skillful behavior. You know, let's try to notice and be mindful and not risk. I have a slide on safety specifics. It's really important to educate parents on the reasons or the functions of self-injurious thoughts. And Dr. Hollander is going to speak a whole lot more about that this afternoon. And then it's very important to talk about how to maintain safety, and that all acts require a thoughtful response. There is a wonderful crisis prevention safety plan online. If you Google that, crisis prevention safety plan, it will come up. I don't think I've ever taken a child into therapy and their family without asking them to fill this out, posting one on the refrigerator, and having the child one for themselves. So the crisis prevention safety plan I recommend you use, and then coach parents on how to respond to threats to self and others. I will very briefly touch on, actually I have 2 minutes left. I think I'm going to choose to spend my last 2 minutes on this chain. So this is an example of what a chain in DBT looks like. What you have here in the sort of pink is a mother, and in the sort of gray is a son, and the big 3 circles are what happened to the 2 of them. So the situation was that the mom, hyper-vigilant because her son was very reactive, is in the kitchen, and her son is texting. And the mom is picking up signals from her son. Oh, and by the way, it's like -2 degrees outside. It was that horrible winter we had in Massachusetts. It was that. She's up there. The emotion is she's feeling super anxious. Well, not super anxious. She's anxious at a 4, and she has a thought, he's intense. Which, of course, what does that do to her anxiety? It brings it up, right? And her sensations was that she was tense in her shoulders and her eyes were darting. She was sort of looking in his direction. Meanwhile, he's texting and he has a thought, no one is getting back to me. He's feeling super lonely, which is a big trigger for him. And so his shoulders are tight too, but he's tearing up. And then the son drops his phone. He either dropped his phone or he threw it. We're not quite sure, but it broke. The mom's first thought was a word that I cannot repeat here. And then the next thought was, I must fix it. Emotion was complete panic. The son's thought was, now I'm really alone. The phone is broken. The next thing that happens is the actual prompting event, which is that mom went to pick up the phone because she wanted to fix it, right? She's feeling relief. She's got the phone. Maybe she has control over this. The son is thinking, mom will never give me that phone back. His fear goes up. His anger completely escalates. All of this happens in a half a second, of course. And then he runs from home. He's in a t-shirt, he's barefoot, and it's -20 outside. And it took us 2 hours. So, when we were able to do this, there was a lot of, I didn't know you wanted to fix it. I didn't know that you were feeling so low. That's our job. As therapists, helpers, that's our job. Unpack this. And once we unpack it, that's where we can find solutions. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Gracias a Maripol for her presentation. Ahora procederemos al panel de discusión con los conferenciantes de la mañana. We now will be inviting the presenters for a panel discussion. The panel presenters for this morning. And el panel será moderado por la doctora Cintia García Col. Es un orgullo para mí presentarla. Tu carrera le ha dado la vida a un nuevo movimiento en el campo de la psicología. Ella obtuvo un doctorado, su PhD en Psicología del Desarrollo de la Universidad de Harvard. Ha trabajado en el desarrollo juvenil étnico racial minoritario con un énfasis en despatologizar las vidas de los jóvenes y responsabilizar a la academia por entender su desarrollo tomando en consideración el contexto. Tiene 50 libros y capítulos y más de 80 artículos publicados en las áreas de temperamento y juventud en riesgo, maternidad, bienestar en las minorías étnicas raciales, incluyendo becas sobre la paradoja de los inmigrantes en Estados Unidos. Ha ejercido como editora de 2 importantes revistas, Developmental Psychology and Child Development. En la actualidad, ha ocupado cargos de liderazgo en decenas de organizaciones comunitarias dedicadas al bienestar de las familias de las minorías y ha sido durante mucho tiempo mentora de colegas, académicos y fellows. La Sociedad para la Investigación del Desarrollo en el Niño recientemente acaba de otorgarle un premio internacionalmente competitivo de mentoría en reconocimiento de su arda labor y esfuerzo. Con ustedes la doctora Cintia García Cuesta.
Buenos días. Buenos días. I feel privileged to be here among our visitors and our colleagues, and actually where I feel like a good conference is where we all learn. And I must say I've learned a lot already in this conference. So we have 2, right? We have 2 places here, microphones. This is the time to bring your questions, your comments, your disbelief, right? Your critics. Everything is welcome at this point. I'm sure that you might have some very profound questions at this point. I'm just going to start with one so I can warm us up, but then I'm expecting people be on the microphone over there. So, I'm a human developmentalist. I believe in early intervention, I believe in early identification, and those students that work with me know that we start with babies, right? And Domingo, you mentioned a lot that sometimes adolescence is late. And from my perspective, it usually is. I mean, it's a great window of opportunity because the brain is going through a lot of new possibilities, new ways of thinking, but it also can be a place where a lot of the dysregulation that we talked about, gets sort of fed up, It really feeds with everything else. So how do we move what you've been talking about to really think about how do I identify early, what are the particular behaviors that you would look, how would you work with parents, etc.? So just opening it up.
I think I'll set it up in terms of our reality here. We gotta get our interventions out of psychiatric hospitals and private offices and clinics in schools like this. I mean, we need to get to middle school and elementary school, and we gotta go where the kids are, where the ones that are not yet showing crisis problems or self-harming, etc. So I think we need to do real prevention. We need to move it out of the clinics and out of the hospitals, because not only they're not doing it, not only they're not doing it, it's not what we want to do or who we want to work with.
Right.
If we're going to do real
So
prevention.
schools is definitely one. Another one would be pediatric setting, right? I mean, pediatric settings have these kids. A lot of people go to the pediatrician with some of these questions and everything else, and the pediatricians are also. Go ahead.
Well, I think clinicians really need to be educated, because I think they'll see cuts on an arm and the child will say it's the cat, and the pediatrician says, oh, okay. I mean, I think they're not oriented enough to think that there's a psychiatric diagnosis going on. So it's conferences like this where we need to encourage the medical profession to come, not because they're treating them, but because they're gatekeepers so much. I also think the other group community that we need to be orienting are peers. I think peers know much more than any of us know, and they hear these things from each other, they don't know what to do, and then they're left out there, I don't want to use the word hanging, but they're left out there hanging, not knowing what to do for their friends. I think that's where we also need to be doing some orienting.
So we're talking about the public in general, right? We're talking about systems of health, primary care. Remember that many of you psychologists now who are in training and thinking about moving into primary care. So this notion of being able to have a checklist or something, I'm thinking of, being crazy in my own way. All those Achenbachs and all those early people that started doing checklists and stuff like that, we come up with some ways of thinking about not only child behaviors, but relationships.